November 1944. A damp, freezing wind sweeps across a farm field in eastern France. Inside the steel hull of a German Panther tank, almost immediately, thick, oily smoke begins to pour from the hull. The top hatches bang open, and the surviving American crewmen scramble out, written directly into American armored doctrine. The United States Army integrated specialized maintenance and recovery platoons into every armored battalion, and crucially, they matched their equipment to the weight of their combat vehicles. The M32 was built on the exact same chassis as the Sherman it was rescuing. Parts, fuel, and engine maintenance were entirely interchangeable. The German Army faced a crippling mismatch in this exact area. A 45-ton Panther with a broken transmission was incredibly difficult to move. It often required 2 or even 3 heavy prime movers to tow it out of the mud. If a Panther slipped into a deep ditch during a retreat, the German crews frequently had to pack it with explosives and destroy it themselves. The American system suffered no such paralysis. By midnight, the muddy crossroads is entirely empty. The 3 Shermans the Panther crew had tallied as permanent kills are gone, dragged silently away down a rutted dirt road. The German mathematical equation has already been corrupted, but pulling a shattered 30-ton machine out of a ditch is only the first half of the equation. A recovered hull with a hole through the armor and a destroyed engine is still just dead weight. The tow cables had to lead somewhere. To understand how these silent steel husks became lethal weapons again, dropping into the mud and sprinting for the nearest ditch. The Panther crew does not pause. The turret traverses smoothly to the right. We have to follow the muddy tracks back to the hidden industrial network, waiting just behind the front lines. The M32 recovery vehicle drags the shattered Sherman 5 miles behind the fighting line, turning off the rutted road and into a muddy farmyard, illuminated by the intense blue glare of acetylene torches. This is not a makeshift garage. It is a heavy ordnance maintenance company, a forward factory operating under canvas tents and camouflage netting. Here, the American Army brought the industrial logic of Detroit directly into the European winter. The yard is deafening. Diesel generators roar, powering floodlights and heavy welding equipment. Large mechanized cranes swing replacement engines through the freezing air. The mechanics wear grease-stained coveralls over heavy wool coats, their hands cracked from cold and heavy oil. They do not sleep in shifts dictated by the sun. They work to the rhythm of the arriving casualties. The 3 Shermans struck earlier that morning are immediately slotted into the repair line. The first tank, the mobility kill with the snapped track, is the simplest problem. Mechanics use heavy pneumatic jacks to lift the 30-ton hull out of the mud. Within a few hours, the shattered drive sprocket is unbolted, a fresh one is torqued into place, and new track links are hammered together with heavy steel pins. The machine is mechanically whole before breakfast. The Sherman that took a direct kinetic hit to the front glacis requires much more invasive surgery. A second shell is loaded, another deafening crack. A second Sherman takes a hit to the drive sprocket, its heavy steel track snapping and unspooling. A 75mm hole is punched clean through the armor. For a retreating German Panzer division, replacing a heavy interlocking armor plate in the field was nearly impossible. For the American ordnance crew, it is standard procedure. A welder cuts a thick square of fresh steel plate from a stockpile, fits it directly over the jagged hole, and welds it solid, sending showers of white-hot sparks into the damp air. But before that patch can be welded, the reality of the battlefield kill must be erased. The interior of a penetrated tank is a charnel house of spalled steel, shattered optics, and blood. Ordnance crews take high-pressure hoses to the interior, washing away the human cost of the German tactical victory. It is grim, necessary labor, Once the hull is empty, new radios are slotted into the bulkheads. Fresh ammunition is stacked in the wet stowage racks. The machine is scrubbed, repainted, and reborn. This speed was only possible because the Sherman was designed from the beginning as a modular system. It was not a bespoke, hand-fitted weapon. Its parts were interchangeable. If a German Panther shattered its final drive gear, the mechanics often had to remove the heavy turret and lift the engine just to access the broken machinery, a massive undertaking that required specialized heavy gantries they rarely possessed. American mechanics simply unbolted the Sherman's armored nose housing across the road. The tank grinds to a dead, helpless halt. A third shell punches through the turret ring of the next vehicle in line and pulled the broken transmission straight out the front. When an American tank was too damaged to repair quickly, it was pushed to the edge of the yard and ruthlessly stripped for organs. A functional turret from one wrecked Sherman was simply dropped onto the intact hull of another. The system cannibalized its own dead to keep the arithmetic moving. By dawn, 2 of the 3 tanks the German gunner killed are idling in the staging area, fully fueled, patched, and ready to return to the exact same crossroads. But the system had a physical limit. The 3rd Sherman had burned completely to the ground. The German kinetic strike had ignited the main ammunition bins, warping the hull and melting the suspension into a puddle of fused steel. No mechanic can patch vaporized metal. When a tank was truly destroyed beyond all salvage, field repair was impossible. To maintain relentless pressure on the German lines, the Americans needed an even larger mechanism, one capable of replacing a machine that no longer existed. When the 3rd Sherman burned to the ground, the field mechanics could do nothing but push the twisted, fused metal into a ditch. To the German gunner who had fired the fatal shot, this was a permanent, undeniable victory. The machine was vaporized. Within 4 minutes, 3 American tanks are smoking, motionless hulks. The rest of the column pops smoke grenades and reverses behind the safety of the ridge. But for the American Armored Battalion, a total loss simply triggered a different set of gears within the logistical machine. Before the smoke had even cleared from the valley, a battalion supply clerk, sitting in a damp tent a few miles away, logged the destroyed vehicle on a typewriter. That single keystroke activated the American replacement system. The requisition order traveled backward over field telephones and radio relays, reaching massive ordnance depots in liberated French and Belgian ports like Cherbourg and Antwerp. Here, the scale of American industrial dominance was laid bare on the concrete. Thousands of M4 Shermans sat bumper to bumper, painted in factory olive drab, smelling of cosmoline grease and sea salt. They had crossed the Atlantic on Liberty ships, specifically to fill the gaps created by German high-velocity cannons. But a tank is useless without a human crew to operate it. The American logistical system did not just stockpile machinery, it stockpiled men. At massive replacement depots across Europe, thousands of newly trained armor crews waited for assignment. When the clerk's requisition arrived at the depot, a new 5-man crew was immediately paired with a fresh Sherman. They loaded the ammunition racks, fueled the radial engine, and drove the machine directly out of the staging area toward the front lines. Because the Sherman was completely standardized, inside the German tank, the crew breathes a collective sigh of relief. They are exhausted, their ears ringing. The new crew did not have to learn the quirks of a specific mechanical variant. A driver trained in Kentucky could slide into the seat of a tank built in Detroit, adjust the periscope, and drive it into combat in eastern France without missing a gear. Within 48 hours of the original tank burning down, a completely new machine, carrying a new crew, rolled into the battalion assembly area to take its place. The American armored column was mathematically whole again. For the German High Command, this pipeline of steel was incomprehensible. They understood factory production, but they could not replicate the American method of continuous battlefield replacement. The German logistical network was slowly strangling itself. When a Panther rolled off the assembly line in Germany, it faced a perilous journey just to reach the theater of war. It had to be loaded onto a flatbed railcar and moved across a railway network that was bombed daily by Allied aircraft. More fatally, German doctrine actively sabotaged its own veteran units. When a frontline panzer division took heavy losses, Berlin rarely sent individual replacement tanks to rebuild that specific unit. Instead, the German High Command preferred to hoard new vehicles to build entirely new panzer brigades from scratch. This looked highly impressive on a strategic map, but it left the veteran combat units chronically starved of equipment. But they have done exactly what they were trained to do. They have executed the brutal arithmetic of the battlefield. A German armored company that lost 3 tanks to American artillery simply fought the next morning with 3 fewer tanks. The American pipeline was a continuous conveyor belt feeding directly to the point of contact. The German supply line was a fractured hose, leaking precious resources before they ever reached the shivering gunners in the mud. The German crews were diligently tallying kills against an enemy that instantly replenished its losses. But the true fatal flaw in the German reliance on heavy armor only revealed itself when the relentless American pressure forced them to move. What happened to the mathematics of the Panther when the German army was forced to abandon its static defensive positions and retreat? The static ambush was the only environment where the Panther's arithmetic functioned perfectly. But wars are not won by sitting still. When the relentless arrival of fresh American armor finally outflanked the crossroads, the German unit had to abandon its prepared kill zone and pull back. The moment the tracks reversed into the freezing mud, the mathematical advantage of the heavy German tank collapsed. A retreating Panther was no longer an invincible fortress. It was an overweight, overstressed machine fighting its own mechanical limits. The gunner marks 3 tallies in his mind. 3 enemy tanks killed. 3 units of combat power permanently erased from the war. Deep winter mud gripped the complex, overlapping road wheels. The immense weight of the 45-ton hull put catastrophic strain on the final drive gears, which were notoriously fragile when operating in reverse. Deep inside the engine compartment, a transmission seal bursts under the pressure. A terrible, metallic grinding noise tears through the steel floor plate. The right track locks completely. The great machine skids violently into a ditch, the engine stalling out into silence. In an American armored column, this exact mechanical failure was a temporary delay. The crew would pop the hatches, wait for the heavy wreckers, and be towed to a forward ordnance company. But the German crew climbing onto the cold engine deck faces a very different logistical reality. There are no heavy prime movers coming for them. The specialized Berger Panther recovery vehicles are incredibly rare, and they are constantly breaking down themselves under the immense strain of towing such heavy machines. Even if a recovery tractor were available, the retreating army has no fuel to spare to drag a broken chassis backward across a collapsing front line. The rail network behind them has been systematically shattered by Allied heavy bombers. There is no factory waiting to rebuild this machine. The superiority of the high-velocity gun and the steeply sloped armor suddenly means absolutely nothing. The machine cannot move. The German crew knows they are outnumbered across the theater, but they believe deeply in the math of attrition, and the infantry is leaving them behind. The crew receives the inevitable order over the radio. They must fall back on foot, but they cannot leave a functional, highly advanced weapon for the advancing Americans to capture. The tank commander pulls a thermite grenade from his webbing, arms it, and drops it directly down the open breech of the 75mm gun. He tosses another down into the engine block. The crew runs up the muddy embankment as white-hot fire melts the precision optic lenses, warps the deadly barrel, and turns thousands of hours of German engineering into a useless, smoking pile of slag. During the long fighting retreats across France and Belgium, the German army frequently lost more heavy tanks to mechanical failure, mud, and lack of fuel than they did to direct enemy fire. Entire companies of formidable armor were scuttled by their own crews on the sides of narrow dirt roads. The heavy, complex design that made the Panther so deadly in a static firefight made it a fatal logistical anchor during a withdrawal. The German command continued to calculate their success by the number of American vehicles they destroyed. They failed to realize that their own doctrine of over-engineering was bleeding their armored divisions dry from the inside out. If a superior tank like the Panther can destroy 3, 4, or 5 enemy tanks for every loss it takes, the American logistics machine was constantly absorbing its losses, pulling its damaged steel backward, fixing it, and pushing it forward again. The German army was leaving its broken steel behind in the mud forever. A Panther crew might achieve their required ratio, killing 5 Shermans in a brilliant afternoon ambush. But if that same Panther broke a drive gear retreating that night, the net operational result heavily favored the Americans. The German math was fundamentally broken, but the final collapse of this doctrine would not happen in a quiet ditch. It would happen when the German High Command attempted one last massive armored offensive, relying entirely on the kill ratio to shatter the American lines. What happens when a military built on dealing out mechanical death collides with an enemy system that simply refuses to stay dead? December 1944. The Ardennes Forest. The temperature plunges well below freezing, turning the muddy roads into hardened ice. This is the ultimate operational test of the German calculation. The High Command launches a massive armored counter-offensive, hurling hundreds of Panthers and heavy tanks against the American lines. The objective is to punch a hole straight through the Allied front and capture the deep-water port of Antwerp. The method relies entirely on the familiar arithmetic of attrition. At dozens of snow-covered crossroads, the German spearheads strike. The gunner keeps his eye pressed tightly against the rubber cup of his Zeiss optic. He is watching a muddy crossroads 800 meters away. The sheer volume of American armor will not matter. Eventually, the enemy must run out of steel. The initial engagements go exactly according to the Panther's engineering. From concealed positions in the dense pine trees, high-velocity 75mm guns tear into American armored cavalry units. Shermans are halted, pierced, and set ablaze. The German gunners tally their kills. In some sectors, they achieve exchange rates of 4 or 5 to 1. By the rigid doctrine of the kill ratio, the American units defending these sectors are mechanically shattered. The road to the coast should be completely open, but the road does not open. The German advance does not break into the soft rear areas. Instead, it bogs down in a brutal, freezing slog. The German command calculates that the American armored divisions must be combat ineffective. The numbers clearly show that the enemy has bled too much steel to continue fighting, but they cannot see what is happening just a few miles behind the American lines. In the freezing dark, despite the absolute chaos of the surprise attack, the American recovery system does not collapse. It actually accelerates. Heavy M32 recovery vehicles drag halted Shermans backward over the icy roads, their tracks slipping and grinding in the snow. Ordnance crews, shivering in the bitter wind, use blowtorches to thaw frozen wrenches and frozen hands. They work under canvas tarps to block the wind, pulling ruined transmissions and welding fresh steel plates onto penetrated hulls around the clock. Simultaneously, the vast replacement pipeline floods the theater. Entire trains loaded with fresh Shermans roll toward the front. Confident they have shattered the American spearhead, The Panther pulls back to the next defensive line. Replacement crews drive new tanks directly from railheads into the combat zone. They arrive so quickly that some vehicles enter the fighting, still carrying the white shipping chalk marks from the port depots on their turrets. When the German armored columns push forward the next morning to exploit their tactical victories, they do not find the empty roads their math predicted. They run into a solid, unyielding wall of olive-drab steel. The American units they fought yesterday have entirely regenerated. Meanwhile, the German spearhead is experiencing the exact opposite reality. The harsh winter weather and rough terrain push the heavy, over-engineered Panthers to their mechanical limits. Transmissions shatter under the strain of the icy hills. Final drives snap, fuel tanks run dry. With no functional recovery network and no replacement pipeline, every broken machine is left to freeze in the snow. Within 2 weeks, the massive German offensive grinds to a permanent halt. They achieved their required kill ratios in dozens of local firefights. They destroyed hundreds of American tanks. But because they could not recover their own casualties, and because the Americans replaced theirs almost instantly, the German armored forces simply evaporated. They were tactically victorious, but operationally annihilated. The battle proved that a military force cannot shoot its way out of a logistical failure. The German High Command had focused entirely on destroying the weapon. They believe they have bought their sector at least 2 days of quiet. But the quiet only lasts until dawn. What is the final historical verdict on an army that measures victory by the barrel of a gun while ignoring the machinery that feeds it? The German gunner, staring through his Zeiss optic at the muddy French crossroads, was not hallucinating. When he saw the American Sherman roll over the ridge, carrying a thick, fresh scar of welded steel directly over the hole he had punched just 20 hours earlier, he was looking at the actual mechanism of his defeat. He had pulled the trigger, tallied the kill, and trusted the math. But his arithmetic was fundamentally flawed. The question on that freezing morning was never really about which tank had the thicker armor, the wider tracks, or the higher velocity gun. It was about the vast, invisible systems operating relentlessly behind the steel. The German army had built heavy, over-engineered masterpieces of destruction, specifically designed to inflict massive casualties in localized, static engagements. They trusted that if they destroyed enough enemy machinery, the sheer weight of American casualties would force the offensive to collapse. They failed because they completely misunderstood what they were shooting at. To the German High Command, a tank was an isolated asset, a bespoke weapon that lived or died on its own merits. As the morning fog burns off the valley floor, the German commander raises his binoculars to survey the empty road. To the American command, a tank was merely the visible, expendable endpoint of a massive industrial and logistical chain. The kill ratio proved to be an illusion. A neat hole punched through a steel plate is not a permanent victory if the enemy controls the ground, possesses the heavy tractors to tow the wreck, and commands the forward ordnance companies to patch the hull overnight. The Panther was undeniably a brilliant tactical weapon, but it was trapped inside a rotting logistical network. Its crews fought with immense skill and bravery, yet every time their tracks slipped into a deep ditch, or their fragile final drives shattered under the strain of a fighting retreat, their superior engineering became a permanent casualty of a war they could not sustain. The American logistical system absorbed the friction of combat. It did not rely on individual mechanical immortality. It relied on standardized parts, continuous forward replacement, and a doctrine that prioritized total operational readiness over individual tactical kill counts. The system cannibalized its own dead, welded fresh armor over its fatal wounds, and replaced its vaporized losses from European ports. Before the German army could even advance to claim the battlefield, The German defenders could see the relentless, suffocating waves of American tanks. He expects to see the blackened, abandoned wrecks from the day before. Instead, he hears the deep, rhythmic thumping of heavy engines, but they could never clearly see the true machinery producing them. That hidden machinery was human. The victory in Western Europe was not just secured by the tank commanders peering through periscopes or the infantrymen shivering in the snow. It was secured by a vast, unseen army of laborers who fought their war in the grease and the freezing mud. It was won by the heavy equipment operators driving unarmored recovery vehicles into dark, uncleared kill zones. It was won by the riggers hooking heavy steel tow cables to shattered hulls, their hands bleeding through soaked canvas gloves. It was won by the supply clerks typing requisitions in damp tents, ensuring the pipeline of steel never stopped flowing from the coastal depots. And it was won by the ordnance mechanics, working through the night under the harsh blue glare of acetylene torches. They cut away the twisted, blood-stained metal of yesterday's tactical defeat and welded the machines whole again by dawn. They fought a war against mathematical attrition, and they defeated it with wrenches, chains, and interchangeable parts. Long after the high-velocity cannons fell silent, the true legacy of the armored campaigns remained etched into the surviving steel. Over the crest of the hill, an American armored column appears. It is moving at full strength, and as the German commander focuses his lenses, it is not found in the pristine, factory-smooth armor of a museum piece. It is found in the thick, uneven scars of a forward field weld, laid down in the freezing dark by a mechanic who simply refused to let the machine stay dead. He sees something that defies reason. On the hull of the lead Sherman, directly over the spot where a high-velocity shell had punched through, just 20 hours earlier, there is a thick, fresh scar of welded steel. By every rule of war the German crew understood, that machine was dead. It had been crossed off the ledger, yet here it was, engine roaring, advancing back into the fight. To understand why this absolute tactical victory evaporated overnight, we first need to look closely at the rigid mathematical doctrine the German army trusted to win the war. He does not have to wait long. From the edge of a distant tree line, a column of olive-drab American M4 Shermans rolls into view. The Panther was not just a vehicle, it was a mathematical equation cast in steel. Weighing 45 tons, it was built around a long 75mm gun, generating so much pressure that its armor-piercing shell traveled at over 900 meters per second. The frontal armor was steeply sloped, designed to bounce incoming fire from shorter, lower-velocity Allied cannons. Every weld, gear, and optic was engineered for one explicit purpose. A single German tank had to kill multiple American or Soviet tanks before being threatened itself. By the winter of 1944, the German High Command knew they could no longer win a war of industrial production. Allied factories were protected by oceans and distance, while German rail yards and industrial centers were pounded daily by heavy bombers. The only logical strategy left was to trade European geography for disproportionate Allied casualties. If the military could achieve a kill ratio of 5-to-1 or even 10-to-1 in localized engagements, the overwhelming numbers of the enemy would theoretically cease to matter. The American offensive would eventually stall, choked by the sheer volume of its own burning steel. This doctrine trickled down from map rooms directly to the crews shivering in the damp forests of France. It dictated exactly how they fought. German armor was frequently deployed in carefully camouflaged, static defensive positions. They would wait for the American columns to advance into a pre-registered kill zone. They move cautiously, their tracks churning the winter mud. For the German gunner, this is not a duel, it is an execution. Open fire at maximum effective range, tally the hits, and retreat to the next ridgeline before American artillery could find them. To the German crewmen pulling the trigger, the results of this doctrine looked undeniably successful. When a high-velocity shell slammed into an advancing Sherman, the kinetic energy usually did its job. The American tank would violently halt. Smoke would billow from the engine deck or the turret ring. The surviving crew would bail out and sprint for the nearest tree line. In the brief silence after the ambush, the German tank commander would mark a tally on his map board. In the evening, those tallies were compiled into after-action reports and sent up the chain of command. The numbers consistently told German generals exactly what they wanted to hear. The kill ratio was holding, the math was working, the enemy was bleeding faster than they could advance. But the entire German strategic calculation rested on a massive, unexamined assumption. When a German gunner saw an enemy tank stop moving, catch fire, or lose a track, he confidently recorded it as destroyed. He assumed that a tank left abandoned in a muddy ditch was a permanent loss, struck forever from the enemy order of battle. That assumption was formed by the German army's own worsening logistical reality. For a heavy, over-engineered German tank fighting a defensive war, his machine is armed with a high-velocity 7.5mm gun designed specifically to pierce armor at ranges where the Americans can barely reply. A snapped track or a shattered transmission during a retreat often meant the vehicle could not be saved. Lacking fuel and recovery tractors, the crew had to blow up their own superior machine and walk away. The German military assumed the Americans faced the exact same limitations. They believed a battlefield casualty was a final verdict. Counting a halted Sherman as a dead Sherman was a critical miscalculation. The German command could see the immediate consequence of their weapons, but they were entirely blind to what happened after their guns fell silent. To see why the German math failed, we have to look closely at what actually happened to an American tank the moment the armor was pierced. The assumption that a stopped tank was a dead tank ignored the physical reality of armored combat. To understand the illusion of the German kill ratio, we must look at what exactly happened in the seconds after high-velocity steel met American armor. When a German gunner recorded a destroyed Sherman, he was usually observing one of three things. The most common was a mobility kill. A shell striking the lower hull might shatter a drive sprocket, snap a heavy steel track, or blow apart a suspension unit. The 30-ton tank would instantly slew to a violent, grinding halt. The tank commander calls the distance. The loader slams an armor-piercing shell into the breach, the heavy steel block sliding shut with a sharp, mechanical clack. For the men inside, a stationary tank in a registered kill zone was a steel coffin. Standard operational procedure dictated immediate evacuation. The crew would scramble out the hatches, drop into the freezing mud, and run for cover. To the German observer watching through a magnified optic, the tank was decisively defeated. But mechanically, the radial engine still idled, the radios still hummed, and the hull was fully intact. It simply needed a new set of steel shoes. The second type of casualty was the firepower kill. A kinetic round might dent the turret ring, jamming the rotation mechanism, or shatter the main gun mantlet. Defenseless, the crew would abandon the vehicle. To mask their escape across open ground, American tank commanders frequently popped smoke grenades, letting them roll down the engine deck. From 800 meters away, this thick, churning smoke looked exactly like a fatal internal fire. The German gunner would confidently log another total loss, traverse his turret, and shift his aim to the next target. Even when a German shell successfully pierced the armor, the result was rarely absolute destruction. A heavy shell punching through the steel plate was devastating to the human crew, but unless the glowing shrapnel directly struck the main ammunition bins and triggered a catastrophic internal explosion, the machine itself survived. The kinetic impact might shred the internal wiring, crack the transmission block, or ruin the instrument panels. The gunner exhales, makes a minor adjustment to the handwheel, and pulls the trigger. The 45-ton Panther violently rocks back on its interleaved suspension, but the heavy, cast steel hull remained structurally sound. This was the fundamental difference in how the two armies viewed their equipment. The German High Command, strained by resources, increasingly treated a tank as a singular, irreplaceable asset. If it broke down or took a penetrating hit during a fighting retreat, it was dead. The American military viewed the Sherman tank not as a bespoke artifact, but as an industrial platform. It was a standardized steel container for modular, easily swappable parts. A neat 2-inch hole punched through the glacis plate was not a fatal wound. It was merely a structural gap that needed to be patched. As long as the hull was not warped by the intense heat of an ammunition fire, American ordnance doctrine classified the machine as salvageable, and crucially, because the Allies were continually pressing the offensive, they controlled the ground after the firefight ended. The German panzers, operating under a doctrine of flexible defense, always fired, tallied their kills, and retreated. They left the battlefield behind them. They left the disabled Shermans sitting quietly in the mud, confident their arithmetic was correct. But as the sound of the German guns faded over the next ridgeline, a completely different type of American engine could be heard starting up in the rear areas. The deafening crack of the cannon shatters the morning quiet, filling the cramped turret with the acrid smell of cordite. The combat crews had walked away. The question now was what invisible system would drive into the dark, uncleared kill zone to drag thousands of tons of steel back from the dead. Night falls over the freezing French valley. The battlefield is quiet, littered with what the German gunners confidently recorded as corpses of steel. The surviving American combat crews have long since retreated to the rear to warm themselves and wait for fresh orders. To the German observers holding the next ridge, the killing field is a settled matter, but darkness brings a massive shift in the American order of battle. The fighting has stopped. The salvage operation has begun. Out of the gloom, the deep rumble of radial engines returns to the valley. The machines that roll down the muddy road look exactly like M4 Shermans, but they lack a main cannon. Instead, a dummy gun barrel is welded to a fixed turret in place of offensive firepower. These vehicles are equipped with an 18-foot steel A-frame crane and a massive 60,000-pound mechanical winch. These are M32 armored recovery vehicles. The men inside are not gunners or loaders. They are mechanics, riggers, and heavy equipment operators. Down in the valley, the lead Sherman jolts as if struck by an invisible hammer. A brilliant flash of sparks showers from its front glacis. Their job is to drive directly into uncleared kill zones and steal the German army's tactical victories back from the mud. Working without headlights to avoid drawing mortar fire, the recovery crews wade into the freezing slush. They locate the Sherman that lost its drive sprocket. In the morning ambush, the smell of burned cordite and spilled diesel still hangs heavy around the cold steel. The riggers dismount, their thick canvas gloves quickly soaking through with freezing mud and grease. They unspool heavy steel tow cables from the M32's winch, dragging the thick iron hooks through the dirt to attach them to the towing pintles welded to the disabled Sherman's lower hull. It is brutal, dangerous labor. The riggers often have to climb inside the dark, damaged hulls to shift shattered transmissions into neutral, or cut away tangled track pins with an acetylene torch. Once the cables are secured, the M32's engine roars. The heavy winch engages. Thick steel cables pull taut, vibrating fiercely with kinetic tension. 30 tons of dead, immobile steel groans against the suction of the earth. Slowly, the shattered tank is dragged backward out of the ditch. If the tracks are completely severed, the Sherman is simply dragged, like a massive iron sled, until it reaches solid ground. This was not a desperate, improvised effort. It was a highly organized system,